All right, thank you for joining us on what RIAs need to know about cybersecurity in 2023. We will get started in about 1 minute. All right, thank you for joining us. What RIAs need to know about cybersecurity in 2023. First, to get started, there's a little series of buttons on the bottom. You can use the Q&A button to ask us questions during the webinar. Will you just do me a quick favor? Click on that Q&A icon and make sure that it comes up. Being in tech, I know how these things always go sideways at the worst possible time. So first, if you can hear me, please just type, "I can hear you" in here. And then if you can see a little kitten on the screen, type, "I can see you." Awesome. All right. Thank you so much. So finally, you're going to want to grab a pencil or something to write with. There is a lot that we are going to go over, and you will want to be able to refer back to some of it later. So who am I? I'm Jonathan Addington. I'm the founder of JM Addington Technology Solutions and Cybersecure RIA. I have been in tech since 2004. I founded JM Addington Technology Solutions in 2010. And as we became more and more focused on finance, we founded Cybersecure RIA to focus specifically on RIAs and helping you be secure and stay compliant. And cybersecurity has been the focus of my career since the beginning. And in 2023, we have a fantastic growing team, a full staff to support RIAs across the board, which sometimes means working with existing IT providers to help enhance the cybersecurity of your firm. All right, but why listen to me? I've been doing this a very long time, both personally and professionally. I am already a recognized expert within the industry, and I literally wrote the book on the SEC cybersecurity rule coming out this year. All right, so why should you care about this? It's another regulation, it's a proposed rule, so what? I mean, the short version is the SEC says you should care. But even if you're not SEC registered, your state also is going to say that you have to care. We've got about 15 states today that have similar regulations for state registered RIAs, and many more states have similar cybersecurity laws at the state level for all businesses within their borders. So here are the things that we're going to go over today. We're going to talk about why the SEC created the cybersecurity rule. We're going to go over the new reporting and disclosure requirements, especially the public-facing disclosures. We're going to go over how the SEC can already enforce it through existing laws and regulations. We're going to go over the employee training that's expected as part of the rule. We're going to go over vendor due diligence, and then policies, procedures, and technical controls, and then compliance versus security, which are close to the same thing, but not quite. All right, so first, why does this rule exist? I think this is an important point if you want to understand some of the conclusions the SEC comes to later on and why they've asked for specific things. And basically, the SEC says cybersecurity attacks are just getting awful today. And there's a lot of third-party data to back it up. This prediction from AIG is that cybercrime and ransomware will globally cost the economy $10.5 trillion by 2025. And that's up from $300 million in 2015. It's so bad right now that every 11 seconds, a ransomware attack has taken place against a business. And so to put $10.5 trillion in perspective, that's $14 million per minute, roughly half of the US GDP, and about 4 times the GDP of England. And the SEC calls this adverse. In my more simple parlance, I just call it bad. And there are a lot of rules already that cover this ground under existing regulations. And they're unclear, though, right now, and they're overlapping. The SEC has enforced cybersecurity and identity protection regulations under Gramm-Leach-Beachley and the Investment Advisors Act. The environment has changed significantly, and today it makes sense to condense these regulations into a single rule. This is actually one of the clearer regulations I've read from the government, and it's really helpful in that perspective, because so many of the regulations just boil down to stay secure, but they never tell you what the expectations are. And so the rule really protects you from that perspective, in that it gives you some objective guidelines to say that you are or are not doing what the SEC expects you to do from a cybersecurity perspective. All right, and if it's proposed, why does it matter now? So first of all, it is on their agenda to become official in October. But in the meantime, they already see this as under their purview and that they have the ability to enforce these rules. They note very early on in the rule that advisors are required to minimize risk for their clients as part of their fiduciary obligation. And of course, the fiduciary duty, this is of course the cornerstone, the foundation of many, if not all, of the regulations from the SEC. And this includes keeping information confidential, backup and disaster recovery, proper administrative and technology controls, and a whole lot more. In fact, you should already have language in your code of ethics that goes over a lot of this, just not with the cybersecurity spin. Here are some of the regulations and laws that the SEC references in the proposed rule, and we did not go through all of them. So the message is that the SEC can enforce this today. You can consider this as the minimum standards the SEC will hold you to. And in fact, we're already seeing the SEC audit firms and trying to hold them to these cybersecurity standards under the existing rules and regulations. But again, the good news is, from an IT perspective, the SEC does a great job clarifying what these expectations are. Let's start with the changes to disclosures in the rule. First, there are changes to the ADV Part 2 form. The SEC wants to know when you have been attacked. Some of this information will be confidential and some of it will not be. Then there are changes to the CRS form, and this part obviously is not confidential. Everyone on this webinar has a link to their CRS at the bottom of their webpage. And can you imagine adding a new section to this form that lists every successful cyber attack against your firm in the last 5 years? That's in the rule. And depending on the other entities that may be related to your business, there are changes to a bunch of other forms. So especially if you manage a fund or a broker-dealer, there are changes to a lot of forms with overlapping paperwork and different deadlines to fill out in the case of a cybersecurity attack. You only have 48 hours to notify the SEC if there's an attack underway. You also only have 48 hours to notify clients if there's an attack underway. And you will be required to disclose previous incidents to prospective clients, which, by the way, also means your competition will be able to see all of this. And you'll be subject to more disclosures if you're a BD or you're managing a fund. 48 hours is not a lot of time in cybersecurity. Sometimes it's not enough to determine if you're actually under an attack or if there's an anomaly in the logs that's popped up. It definitely is not enough time to tell if it's a material attack or what the impact is going to be. And so you really need to be prepared. You need to have a lawyer who specializes in cybersecurity incidents and RIA compliance on speed dial. You should have a template ready to communicate to the SEC that does not use words like breach or data loss. And you need to have a pregame strategy on what and how you communicate to your clients and the outside world. This is not something that you want to be making up in the middle of a cyber attack. And of course, you're going to have to keep all of this on file for 5 years as part of the record-keeping rules that already exist. The next part of the rule is employee education. And this, of course, focuses on cybersecurity training. You will be expected to tailor the training to the roles. So your partners and CEO should get different training than your administrative staff. So for instance, a common attack against administrative staff is to send an email that impersonates the CEO and then ask the staff to do something like send a wire transfer or something along those lines. Clearly, that's not the same type of training that your CEO needs, where an attack against them more commonly might be email that looks like it's coming from the SEC or another vendor or one of the clients, something along those lines. And because phishing is still way the top way that hackers get into companies, you really need to have a phishing training program to have an effective cybersecurity education program. And the best way you can do that is through phishing simulations. So this is an example of phishing training. It's an automated email that tests employees on a regular basis. And if they click on one of the links in the email, it shows up on a report so they can take some remedial training later. And this is an example of one of the more, this is an example of one of the new phishing techniques. This is not a demo or a simulation. This actually came to my email, and the attachment itself was not malicious, which lets it bypass a lot of spam filters. The goal in this is to get you to call that number on the screen so they can defraud you over the phone, which of course is no better than sending your bank account numbers over the internet. But not a lot of companies train against this type of phishing right now. And an effective education program should also have annual training, kind of like the training that RIAs already have on other compliance topics, where you'll go over that with your employees on an annual basis and have them sign off that says, they went through the training and they understand it. So let's move on to vendor due diligence. This has been a part of cybersecurity frameworks for a really long time, but it's new to RIAs as part of the regulatory environment. You can sum up this portion of the rule as saying your vendors must apply cybersecurity standards that live up to the security the SEC expects of you. Or another way to think about it is, do your vendors risk your data or your client's data? Do they mitigate cybersecurity risk themselves? So you need to start by identifying vendors that have access to you or your client's information. This is a sample list of companies or industries that you may need to conduct due diligence on. Now, it's possible that not all of these apply to you, but there's a good chance that a good number of them do. And it's not just cloud file sharing applications, although that's part of it. It can also extend to platforms like eMoney or your ISP or your backup provider. In some cases, related entities like tax preparation or attorneys. After identifying the vendors that have data or may present a risk, you need to assess what that level of risk is. Finally, you're going to want to ask your vendors or find public-facing documentation on how they protect themselves and their clients, which is you, from cybersecurity risk. So for example, do they encrypt their data? Do they have access controls in place? Do they have a written comprehensive cybersecurity program? This is all information that you should gather and reconfirm annually. And these documents need to be in a place that you can easily access to show an auditor. So this part of the presentation, we're going to pull a lot together. The technical controls and the policies and procedures have a lot of overlap. It's not 100%, but it's significant. because the technical controls really exist to enforce the other policies and procedures you have, but at the system levels. Or in other words, the technical controls exist to make sure that you do what you say you are going to do. In the past, a lot of your paperwork could say that you were going to stay secure, and if you checked off some of those boxes, you were compliant. Today, there are specific technical things to have in place to be compliant. And so the first one of these is identity and access management, IAM. This isn't new in that you were always required to have policies and procedures to make sure that people that did not need to have access to client information did not. This is the technical side of it. Your systems need to ensure that people who don't need access to it cannot have access to it. So for example, the receptionist should not have access to information on clients and portfolios and trades beyond maybe their phone number. And your vendors need to not have access to more information than they need to. And your code of ethics should already have some of this, defining who has access to what and be limiting confidential information to those that need to know it. And it can be a really far-reaching definition. So an example is even a firm that has different advisors with their own books of business. If your firm operates like that, your advisors should not be able to see any confidential information from each other's clients. And this is something that I see most firms miss. And you need to log and audit who accessed what and when. And you ought to have a system that audits those logs to ensure that only authorized persons access the confidential information, and should keep those logs on file for years. And this is a lot harder than it was before because there are more places to store your data than there ever have been in the past, and there are more places to share it. And the logging of it is easy, but it's so verbose that it's hard to comb through to look for abnormalities. If there used to be one needle and one stack of hay to look through, today there's a dozen stacks of hay, but there still is only one needle. And so the bottom line here is that you need technical systems to enforce this. You need to have technology that enforces this for an entire range of applications. And you need to log and audit all of it. And again, you need tools to do this. You can't do all of this by hand because there's just too much. So this ties into our next portion, mobile device management, abbreviated as MDM. And this is for all of your mobile devices, iPhones, iPad, laptops, tablets, that sort of thing. And MDM exists to enforce the administrative controls you have written down on the mobile device level. So for example, your policies should already say you aren't allowed to access client data from a hotel lobby computer, but you probably can today. When you have proper MDM in place, you will not be able to access that from a non-secure location. And so you need to be able to limit or turn off remote access to data. So for example, you ought to require a secure connection to be able to access data remotely. Starbucks isn't secure. And even as you get to some of this, there are other places you might not think of. In-flight Wi-Fi is not encrypted, it's not secure. So how do you have controls that mitigate against that? So your MDM, for example, might require that you have a corporate VPN that secures data even if you're on an airplane. So the MDM forces users to have passcodes on their phone, encryption, and the ability to wipe a device if it's lost, stolen, or left in your Uber. These are all examples of the policies that MDM exists to enforce on the technical level. And of course, you need to log that these policies were in place. So let's go into that just a little bit. Have you ever used a non-work approved cell phone to look up a client's portfolio or trades? Have you ever given a child the device to watch TikTok or YouTube so that you could have an adult conversation? Have you ever borrowed your spouse's phone during vacation just real quick to look something up? And let's say that you're perfect and you've never done any of these things. how would you be able to prove it? This is where the log and auditing comes in. If you've logged everything that's ever been accessed, then you can show that it's never been accessed inappropriately. So there are real emergencies, and sometimes things literally catch on fire, or you deal with a natural disaster, but your MDM should be ensuring that access from non-secure devices or locations during these emergencies are the exceptions, they're not the rule, and that you log all of those. Let's take a look at patching and updates. This goes back to MDM because MDM exists to enforce this as well. You know, if your software isn't up to date, then you really can't access data security. And before your eyes glaze over and you say, we've got this covered, all of your software needs to be kept up to date. And every single time we audit a firm, we find things that are out of date, even when the broker dealers are supposed to be providing security. And there is a lot to keep up with. There are hundreds of applications on the average computer to be kept up to date, and somewhere between dozens and 100 applications on a tablet. And of course, you need to periodically log that the software was updated. In other words, you'll have a record that you did what you said you were going to do when the SEC audits you. So this also fits into our next section, vulnerability management. You might be able to see how all of these start to fit together so that you've got a complete, balanced, and comprehensive cybersecurity strategy. The vulnerability management is where you're going to actively look for where your systems are weak, which at a minimum means that they've been updated. This is both an automated and a manual process. The manual part includes identifying areas that have high risk inside your network or other systems and being able to document what those risks are and how you'll mitigate them. And then there's an automated portion where software can test a lot of the pieces of your network to see if they're vulnerable to specific attacks. And then, of course, you need to document all of this and you need to mitigate it, or you need to be able to document your plans to mitigate it. All right, we're running a little short on time here, but let's get to the next section, data loss prevention, or DLP. And a good DLP plan is going to require that the elements we've already covered, IAM, MDM, and vulnerability management, are already in place. I know it sounds obvious, but this means don't let non-public data leave your systems. But it's not easy. It's the most technical out of everything we're going to cover today. So for example, this is what DLP looks like inside of the Microsoft platform. This is just to give you an idea of how much is involved in DLP. Other platforms look similar. There's just a lot to cover inside of it. And of course, under existing rules, you should already have policies so that you don't let confidential information leave your firm. This is the technical way to enforce it, to block it, and to detect it and report it when something does get through. So some examples here would be making sure that USB drives are turned off, that emails are scanned for sensitive data like social security numbers or banking numbers, that cloud sharing is limited or turned off. And real quick, don't skimp on the cloud sharing. Even if you're the IT person and you think you have it under control, it's so easy to set up cloud sharing applications today as a non-IT person that most firms have way, way more file sharing applications than they're aware of, or the last guy didn't lock it down while you thought they did. And Apple, Microsoft, and Google will all save files to their cloud by default. So it is really easy for you to save client data on a non-secured cloud without realizing it. In fact, I'd almost guarantee that if you're on this webinar today, you have data in insecure locations right now, accidentally. Go back to scanning, just like you scan your email, your firewall should be able to scan your outgoing network traffic and look for traffic to and from unauthorized cloud sharing applications or countries, and at least see if some of these software exists on your computers or in your traffic logs. And again, you need to log all of this. So let's talk for a second about security versus compliance. So security is following the spirit of the rules, and it's obviously actually keeping things secure. The compliance is where you can prove that you were secure and document that you did all of the things that you said you were going to do. It's not perfection, and it doesn't mean that you will never have an incident. And it's not just filling out the paperwork. You can think about this as the crossroads of where security and documentation meet. So you're both doing the things and you're able to demonstrate that you are doing the things required under the regulations to keep your data and your client's data secure. And you don't need to fix all of it, but you do need to document your plans to fix it. You can't make your environment 100% secure, but you should document how you're going to fix the weaknesses. Or sometimes it's not worth fixing. You document that. Sometimes you can't fix it all. Maybe a vendor needs to fix it and they just haven't yet. Larger firms are going to be held to a higher standard than smaller firms. Or sometimes there just might be bigger fish to fry, and that's fine. Just make sure that you write that down. And of course, then you actually need to follow the plan. The last thing we're going to look at today is a cybersecurity risk assessment. This is not the same as your vulnerability program. Your vulnerability program is working constantly to keep things safe, to be looking for vulnerabilities in your system. The risk assessment is a snapshot of things right now. It records what's happening, what's not happening, and it's kind of like an internal security audit. And your business risk is client risk. This is what that's uncovering. And if your business is compromised to the point that you can't function adequately, then you've breached your fiduciary duty. This can be one of the easier pieces of this framework to actually implement, especially after you've done it for the first time. It's really the first step on your cybersecurity journey, and it's the last step. Because you're going to have an assessment, you're going to document findings, you're going to document plans to mitigate it, you're going to document your plans to put vulnerability management programs in place, and MDM and IAM and all of that. And then in a quarter, in a year, you're going to take another assessment to see what kind of progress you've made and start the cycle all over. And this is the most important thing you can do today if you haven't, because this is where you start your journey, and it's where you get the documentation that you've started it. Because you don't have to be perfect, but you do have to be on the path towards becoming more secure. And what else? I mean, these are the core concepts from the rule. These are the minimums. There is definitely more in it, but if you aren't covering these things, then you're not covering any of your bases. So what else can you do today? You can get a free cybersecurity assessment from me. We don't need your passwords. You can involve your current IT if you want. We're not going to remove any of your data. And what's the catch? There is no catch. I want to help you on your cybersecurity journey. I strongly believe that everybody deserves to be secure. That's you, that's your clients, and that's just American businesses in general. So take me up on this. Get a free cybersecurity assessment. You can email the email address on your screen or give us a call on the number that's on the next slide. Or if you feel like it's too soon, you can download our ebook specifically for RIAs on the link here. I'll put it in the comments on the recording as well. And briefly, would you be willing to give me some feedback? Just put a 1 through 10 in the Q&A on how valuable this was for you. All right, I'm going to stick around for a few minutes. If you've got any questions, I'll be here for that. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your day.